a third country to receive migrants deported from the north. The tour of U.S. Secretary Marco Rubio forced the administration of Central American nations to turn hundreds of migrants into their bargaining chips. Panama and Costa Rica are currently trying to transfer migrants who want to return to their country of origin. However, they have not even defined how the operation can be carried out, even though countries like Venezuela have a solid repatriation operation with more than 70 years of experience. In the meantime, hundreds of people suffer degrading treatment. The U.S. news agency AP reported that one of its journalists was prevented from entering the White House for continuing to use the name Gulf of Mexico. Julie Pace, the executive editor of AP, detailed a statement issued by the executive office of the president in which they were told that if they do not align their editorial standards with the executive order of President Trump renaming the Gulf, the agency would be denied access to the Oval Office. The Associated Press finds it alarming that they are being punished for this decision, calling it a violation of the First Amendment. Civil rights organizations point out that denying access to the press for disagreeing with news coverage is a practice of repressive governments. And in Mexico, the government continues to care for migrants after the cancellation of the CBP-1 program, which regulated entry into the United States. From a shelter in the capital, we have the following material.
Catherine arrived in Mexico with her 3 children. 2 of them are already attending school in the capital city, while she works in the kitchen of this care home that shelters 160 migrants.
My case is like that. We went from town to town, from bus to bus. Thank God we arrived here in Mexico City, and due to the restrictions of the neighboring country, the United States, we stayed here. Because I think that here in Mexico, they can also give me good opportunities for me and my children.
Photographs of some of the other families that have passed through the shelter are now part of this mural that reflects the gratitude and affection that accompanied them on their journey.
These photos are of people who made it to the United States to do their immigration regulation there. Some of them are from when they were here, when they were saying goodbye. And we also have other photos of when they arrived in the United States. And they contacted the team to send us photos to thank us for the attention we provide here.
Both adults and children receive, among other support, psychological care to heal the effects that may have been left by the long journeys and dangers during their journey.
There are children who experience the process as a journey, in which they tell you how they were in the jungle and got to know everything with emotion. But there are other children who had to see complicated situations and who see things with fear. There are also cultural promoters here with whom I also work.
In addition to encouraging them to draw, paint, and play in the art laboratory, they're encouraged to participate in productive projects, like this one in which plastic bottles, also known as PET bottles, are recycled, while they're taught about coexistence and family unity through the germination of seeds.
Because
for all the events that are happening, the users are totally disunited. What we are doing is that with this small element of union, we are promoting care and inclusion.
These care homes will be expanded to house a total of 2,000 people, in addition to the 1,000 people receiving care from citizen organizations.
Unfortunately, the cuts in international funding announced by President Donald Trump are impacting these shelters, and that is why Mexico City is assuming the responsibility that corresponds to it.
Through multidisciplinary and, above all, focused efforts, this House of Attention to Human Mobility is especially dedicated to the issue of families. We have even had the opportunity to see how there are little ones with motor disabilities that are cared for. And there is also another similar house that is dedicated to the care of couples.
En la cámara, Ricardo Martínez, Daniel Rosas, teleSUR, Ciudad de México.
On February 6, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela denounced before the world an outrage against its sovereignty, the theft of a state-owned aircraft carried out by order of the U.S. Secretary of State with the complicity of the government of the Dominican Republic. A correspondent in that country tells us more.
This is the second Venezuelan aircraft that the Dominican government has retained in its territory and delivered to the United States. The delivery took place at the airport of La Isabela, Santo Domingo, in the presence of the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, an act that, according to analysts, demonstrates the servility of the Luis Abinader administration towards the interests of Washington.
In the case of the two airplanes, we were talking about a double theft. The fact that it was handed over to someone else does not exempt guilt. In this case, it aggravates it, because it was handed over to the imperial power of the United States of America, and that implies a crime steeped in servility. Very typical of a president with the vocation of a colony governor.
Analysts state that the delivery of the aircraft to the United States not only violates international law, but also exposes the submissive position of the Dominican government in the face of Washington's pressures.
The media show that Marco Rubio made is even more humiliating because he exhibited the president of this country, acting as a colony governor. Handing over the airplane to the United States of America is a form of humiliation. To accept that is very typical of colonial governors.
The context of this act is part of a strategy of permanent aggression against Venezuela, which has intensified after the recent elections in the South American country. Various countries and media outlets have tried to legitimize these actions with a fierce disinformation campaign.
After the elections held in Venezuela, where there was a media campaign by the United States and its allies, and the Dominican Republic is not exempt from that, we know that the Dominican government has handled its foreign policy in a way that is very bad. From my point of view, I see it that way because it has not been a government that, instead of looking for solutions, what it is doing is aggravating the problem. I always give as an example the doctrine that Mexico has in its foreign policy of not interfering in the internal affairs of other nations, and yet it is looking for solutions and dialogue to solve the same.
Recently, during his weekly press conference, the Dominican president was asked about the seizure of the second Venezuelan airplane, but he limited himself to blaming a U.S. court without further details.
A plane was confiscated from Venezuela. We know the U.S. justification for the confiscation, but we want to know what was the protocol that the country used to confiscate the aircraft from the U.S.
They filed a lawsuit in court, and there was a judge's order. That was the legal procedure that was followed.
The secrecy and lack of transparency regarding the confiscation of Venezuelan state-owned airplanes in the Dominican Republic has not only been applied in this case. The same happened with the first airplane, where the Dominican foreign minister assured that neither the public prosecutor's office nor the Dominican government participated in the investigation.
Today, September 2nd, a new court order was received authorizing the delivery of the aircraft to the requesting state. In this case, the United States, and therefore the Public Prosecutor's Office delivered the aircraft and the U.S. government transferred it to its country. Neither the Dominican government nor the Public Prosecutor's Office have participated in the investigation process of the United States. Only this international legal cooperation was required, and since the indicated norms were complied with and judicial orders were obtained, the Public Prosecutor's Office complied with what was ordered by the courts.
El Ministerio Público cumplió con lo ordenado por los tribunales.
For analysts, what is presented today as a simple confiscation is, in reality, a new episode of the economic and political war against Venezuela. Meanwhile, the Bolivarian government reiterates its rejection of these actions and calls on the international community to condemn this new violation of its sovereignty.
Para teleSUR, de República Dominicana. The early hours of Wednesday morning, the Cuban Institute of Music confirmed the death of national singer-songwriter Eduardo Sosa. On February 3rd, Sosa suffered a hemorrhagic stroke, and after several days of illness, he passed away on Wednesday, February 12th, at the age of 52. The news was confirmed by the Cuban Institute of Music, while underlining that the Cuban singer died after several days in a critical state due to the stroke. Sosa, known for his ability to fuse the trova tradition with contemporary elements, dedicated his life to the promotion of Cuban art and to the defense of its legacy. Cuban music has lost a great exponent, but his memory will be celebrated in every chord and in every note that resounds.